Welcome to the Words of Wisdom series. My name is Father Ninian Doohan. I'm at St Patrick's on the Cowgate here in Edinburgh. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Dunkeld, but along with another priest and at the invitation of His Grace the Archbishop of St Andrews in Edinburgh, we're here to establish, God willing, the first oratory of St Philip Neri in Scotland. We are therefore the Edinburgh Oratory Project. This Words of Wisdom series encounters the Carmelite saints, but we're focusing specifically on the virtue of hope. Today I want to speak to you about Blessed Anna of St Bartholomew, a 16th and 17th century Carmelite nun, probably not known to many of you, but she was the secretary, the nurse, and the companion of the great doctor of the Church, St Teresa of Avila. Never underestimate yourself. This could be the motto of Blessed Anna, and perhaps we should adopt it when we are feeling hopeless. As a hospital chaplain here in Edinburgh, and previously in Dundee, I encounter many situations in which people feel hopeless. Recently, I was called to an emergency baptism, and it's actually the first time since being ordained that I had to spend hours outside the operation theatre. Usually emergency baptisms take place after everything has been done that's possible to save a child's life, and it's done on the ward, and although it may have to be done quickly, it was never done in such a situation that I would be expected to go into the theatre itself at the moment of the caesarean section and to baptise even as the baby would be attached to the umbilical cord if necessary. So you can imagine the level of anxiety and indeed drama, trauma that would surround such a situation, not just for mother and father, but for doctors and nurses. Such an atmosphere on any ward is very tense. Even though there are other patients being cared for, you always understand this is a high priority one. I was dressed in the theatre gowns and quite cold, standing outside for such a long time. Thankfully, the caesarean section went better than expected. The little baby girl did have to be resuscitated and worked on with various procedures. I waited and I waited until therefore they were content that now was the correct moment. Previous to going into theatre, I had given Mum and Dad, and for the wee baby girl, a miraculous medal. 3 miraculous medals in honour of Our Lady Thrice Blessed and of the Most Holy Trinity. I also made sure that the mother had a relic, first-class relic of St Catherine Labouré in her hand, at the opportunity therefore of having that in the parish to be able to give to her, I suppose, heightened our expectations that we would be hopeful. The mother had previously lost children in giving birth. She knew the risks. She'd experienced the previous disappointment. After giving the blessing for the expectation of birth and a good delivery, I prayed all the time throughout. When we eventually were able to baptise, the mother said that there was to be a third name that was to be added for the christening, and that name was Hope. You could see the smile on the staff nurse and the midwives and the doctors when this was announced. It kind of crowned all of their own achievements. The Lord, of course, is the author of all wisdom and science, but He requires us, as St Teresa of Avila says, to be His hands and His feet. And so He works through us also. But you could see, therefore, that they transferred their victory over to the Lord. Even if they were unbelievers, that smile, therefore, took them outside of themselves. And so in the emergency baptism, which is only the baptismal formula itself, very short, the ceremonies for baptism will therefore be applied when she's stronger and more able to be brought to church for the great celebration. Hope, therefore, was already going forth out from herself and touching others with that change that baptism brings. The life of a hospital chaplain is never a quiet one, because immediately after vesting from my theatre gowns, I got another call to go somewhere else, to go to another ward, to go to a ward where there's expectation of open heart surgery of an adult man. It turns out that he wasn't a Catholic, and I asked him a number of times, "Oh, did you know that you called for the Catholic chaplain? You do realise I'm a Catholic priest. Are you a Catholic?" And each time he was surprised that I was kind of asking, did you want someone else? He was very convinced that it was a Catholic priest that he wanted. It's nothing to do with me, but without being vain or proud, he says, "It's the real deal, Father, that I want." This man was not so much worried about the surgery he may endure. He was experiencing deep depression, and he wished to hear words of wisdom. At the point in the conversation where he said, "Father, I've lost all hope," I could only help but transfer that smile from before to his own situation, of which I think he found it bizarre that I would be beaming at the moment of him telling me the depths of his apparent despair. I says, "If you've lost hope, I know where you can find it. In fact, I know where you can find her." This caused him a little bit of confusion. I says, "Hope is on the neonatal ward." And then I told him the story as I've told it to you, and about the desperation that accompanied this birth, and about the blessing of Almighty God through the working of this sacramental, the miraculous medal, through the blessings from the Roman ritual, from the faith of mother and father, from the work that God does in the ways of science. All of that, therefore, I said, hope is on the neonatal ward. Hope can also be available to you. And this made him laugh. This made him, for just a small moment perhaps, in a portion of the day in which there was dark clouds, the light of God break through. Holy hope, therefore, as I might have said previously in the series, is not wishful thinking. It's not Catholics crossing their fingers or doing anything of which superstitious, but rather investing your trust in God, and therefore bridging the gap of the things that we do not yet know, that have yet to be revealed to us. We live in time. The past is gone, the future is yet to come, and it is that gap in our knowing of what has yet to come that requires us to pray and to build a relationship with the author of all hope, so that he may give it to us as a grace. I mentioned the story about a young girl and her early baptism because it's very poignant for Blessed Anna or St. Bartholomew. When she was a little girl, just 3 years old, her mother left her in the company of her older sisters, and this is her earliest memory. She wrote an autobiography. I'm not getting any other sources other from her own lips, so to speak. She writes about how she was left on a balcony with her sisters sewing, and her mother tells the sisters to watch out for little Anna, because she may fall, and if she fell from this height, she would surely die. You can see the concern of a mother, but also the trust that she places in her good daughters. Anna then hears the conversation amongst her older sisters, and one of them says, I suppose it's a bit strange when you think about it, but anyway, siblings can be strange, I suppose. They said, well, if Anna was to fall, well, wouldn't that be a blessed thing? Because she's now baptized, she's wholly innocent, she's not reached the age of consciousness yet, therefore she's not responsible for any of her little weaknesses, they're not sins, and so she would go straight to heaven. And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? They weren't thinking of pushing Anna, they were just talking in the speculative ways people sometimes do. And another sister says, don't be so silly. Yes, Anna is baptized, and she hasn't yet reached the age of 7, which is when we become approximately responsible for all the decisions that we make. But why don't you just give Anna a chance? Maybe Anna's life yet to unfold, that she become a saint. And I think many of us feel that if we've lost the original baptismal innocence, or we've had to struggle to keep it, that somehow we would view the idea of death immediately after baptism, or in its approximate feature of our life immediately, not that long afterwards, that therefore we'd be secured to go to heaven. And the rest of us are all living very precariously. Thankfully, the other sister's wisdom, prevailed and triumphed in such a conversation that implanted in the future Blessed Anna two key features. The first one was a fear of turning 7. At that moment, she kind of thought that 7 was this dangerous precipice that she would reach at one point. But that was only because it was the possibility of sinning and offending God. And that, even in the young soul, was already something that she wished to completely avoid in her life. She wanted to be so much for God that the idea of a future sinning against His glory, His love, His presence in her life, that thankfully a second thing happened to her. And that's why it's such a significant moment in her life, and that's why such, let's say, a silly conversation could therefore be so perfectly remembered. Because it was at that point that she experienced her first mystical encounter with Christ. Most of us will never have such encounters in our lives. That does not make us lesser souls. But the saints, I suppose, are chosen from amongst us in which to be held up as what the possibility is in our engagement with Christ, our partnership with Christ, to live through Him, with Him and in Him, as we say in the Mass, but to be truly conformed and to put on Christ with our christening. So at 3 years old, Christ appeared to her, and therefore He would continue to appear to her in her infancy, and He would always appear to her at the age that she was. The beauty of the Christ child growing with her, so that truly, as we often say, that Christ is walking alongside us, that she experienced that in a very literal sense, though in a mystical experience that could not necessarily be encountered or enjoyed by others around her. Hope, therefore, bridged the gap where fear had entered in, the fear of turning 7, the fear of offending God, and Christ placed Himself as the bridge between that present and future life, yet unspoken of. Blessed Anna would grow up in a family that would go to daily Mass, mother, father and sisters together. They would not only assist at daily Mass, but they would place all of the future concerns of the day, being an early morning event, in the hands of the Eucharistic Lord. Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary followed on and from that encounter with Christ, for she, as the perfect disciple, therefore, was placed as the protectress of the family. There was sadness to come in her life, though, which is that her parents would die when she was 10 years old. She would be therefore orphaned very young. She would be placed in the care of her older siblings. Even though there was familiarity with the supernatural at a young age, there is therefore no escaping sorrow in this life, this valley of tears. Her family life was very supportive, but at the point in which that she had to make a decision about what God was calling her to, opposition came forward. And I suppose that is part of the cross for any of us, that even when we want to do good and others want us to also receive the greatest good, somehow these two ideals don't match. And that we all are working for Christ, but there is a feeling that there is diverse paths in which to do that. She had to therefore overcome the opposition of the enemy of God, who never wants to see anyone realize their calling, but also the kindness and the solicitude. Even though there was great familiarity with the supernatural in her own life, this did not mean that she would escape sorrow. Firstly, the sorrow of the loss of her parents and their care for her on earth. Thereafter, as she grew and matured and discerned that she would be called by God to serve in the religious life, there was sorrow at the opposition of her loving family, who also wished only the greatest good for her, but saw a different path unfolding, or desired a different way in which to serve Christ, therefore to be realized in her life. There was the opposition of the enemy of God, and he never wants to see anyone listen to a vocation to greater things. He never wants the sacrifices that someone is willing to make to therefore find their final resting place, which is in the bosom of Christ and his church. Thankfully, all these things were overcome, and she would enter the not so old, recently founded convent of San Jose, St. Joseph in Avila, where the great La Madre, St. Teresa of Avila, was the prioress, the superior. She entered as a lay sister, which means that she wore a white veil perpetually, like the novices of the choir sisters do. These distinctions today within many orders have been blown away, but nonetheless sometimes the functions remain. And that is that a choir sister is responsible for the recitation of the divine office. They keep perfect enclosure, a papal enclosure in fact for Carmelites, whereby they do not go out into the world, and anything that would be of necessity should be brought to them. The lay sister, on the other hand, has interaction with the public and does many domestic duties, and therefore is often the one which is seen by you and me if we go to Carmel. Her role as a lay sister was, in the view of society, as often there is misunderstanding on the way in which that God calls men and women. I give an example, for instance. There's a famous monastery of Saint Pierre in Normandy, and I met a young man who had once been a choir monk. Because of his great intellect, it seemed very obvious that he should train for the priesthood, but also that he should train in an academic way for the monastic life. Despite his great desire, he was never happy. And it wasn't until he spoke to his superiors that therefore he had the opportunity to become a lay brother, that all of the weight of his shoulders fell away and the true calling was made manifest. Often we have these ideas, perhaps of our own objective superiority apparently in a given situation, rather than asking indeed what the Lord desires of us. So Blessed Anna was a lay sister, and therefore in the view of the world perhaps was not as grand as the enclosed sisters of San Jose. And yet, in the encounter with St. Teresa of Avila, it is to Anna that the honour and distinction would go, to become her most intimate associate. She would be at her side perpetually, and for 3 years in the convent she worked with her in a way that no other did. She was illiterate, and yet she would learn to copy the handwriting, which if you ever have the opportunity to see is very peculiar in of itself, very distinctive. Anyone who sees an original edition of St. Teresa of Avila's works, you know straight away, that is Teresa. I've never seen anything like it. And yet she managed to learn to be able to copy that, though she herself could not read nor write. There was a supernaturalness that was given to her, that at the moment that it was necessary in which to perform this task, that it would unfold. Eventually she would be given the opportunity in which to become literate, though it would remain a reasonable struggle in her life. In fact, eventually she would be given the black veil when St. Teresa would die, because she herself would become a superior of a community. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, because apart from being her secretary, she was also the nurse of St. Teresa, who, as she travelled and aged, became more infirm. And yet Blessed Anna herself was not excused. She also had ill health. In fact, she endured it to such an extent that it prevented her from going out with Mother on the travels that should be most necessary for. What is important in the life of Blessed Anna to realise is that the Lord expands the boundaries of what is possible. Blessed Anna would find herself being both the infirmarian and the person in the infirmary, meaning someone who is sick is caring for the other. And in most circumstances, you would say, that doesn't seem to make any logical or rational sense. But St. Teresa of Avila must have been instructed by God in which to show that we never underestimate what is possible for ourselves, that we are to be ever hopeful, but also that we can go beyond what is our natural strength if it is supernaturally given. This would eventually unfold when she too would become a superior in Antwerp, one of the oldest Carmels of the Reform outside of Spain. And in Antwerp she would become the patron saint of the city. There would be those who flocked to her for advice. She, who was previously perhaps not considered worth very much in the eyes of the world, was now the focus of even the rulers of the Low Countries and of Spain itself. The daughter of King Philip II, Archduchess Isabella, went to her in order to seek advice how to govern wisely and well in a Christian fashion. There was sadly interreligious wars at that time, with Dutch Calvinists from the north invading the southern provinces. She would pray time and time again that their armies would be kept out of the city of Antwerp. And on 2 occasions when it seemed like the siege would break, it was through her prayers and the instructions of God to pray greatly, pray greatly, pray greatly, that Blessed Anna therefore broke the occupation and sadly what would have resulted, as it did elsewhere, the destruction of Holy Mother Church, not only in her buildings but in the faith, by the promotion of error and schism in the mystical body of Christ, which ever desires union. As the Father and the Son are one, so are we to be one. Blessed Anna is for any of us therefore a focus on not to lose hope in the midst of apparent trials. Just like the little baby who was baptized, hope, but also in the way that she herself would not be excused to fight the good fight, even when she reached a certain age. She would be the example that we build grace upon grace, and that we are never to look in the rearview mirror, but consistently forward to our home of heaven, where God has promised us happiness for eternity. I hope that you take the opportunity to look further into Blessed Anna's life. I have had the privilege of saying Mass in her convent, of visiting her relics many times over, of even having her choir cloak, that white mantle which is an imitation of the mantle of Elijah that the Carmelites wear when they sing the Divine Office or at Holy Mass. Had the privilege of wearing such a precious relic and of kneeling before her image in the great parlour that she was responsible for building in Antwerp, and there to experience the consolation that she, who is not yet canonised a saint, that she therefore from heaven could assist me in my own lowliness, to be meek and to be generous and humble when perhaps vanity and pride would overcome me. That's the final thing I leave you with. Some Carmelites think she will never be canonised, and the reason being is she does not want to be anything other than the servant of St. Teresa, the great doctor of the Church. That she won't be canonised because it's Blessed Anna's desire that she will always remain one step behind her great teacher in the faith and the ways of religious life. Perhaps that's the way that we too should always view our Christian life, always with Christ in partnership, but of course He must increase and we must decrease.
"10 years of sharing the peace of Christ." Shalom World, God's own channel.